Hello, Michael Stack here, principal of AMAX, founder of COMPClub, and co-author of Your Ultimate Guide to Mastering Workers' Comp Costs. Now, one of the core philosophies that I believe in is that a better outcome for your injured worker will lead to lower workers' compensation costs for your organization. Again, a better outcome for your injured worker will lead to lower workers' compensation costs for your organization. And structured settlements certainly fall under that criteria and that philosophy. I have a special guest joining me today, the Senior Vice President of National Marketing at Ringler Associates, Duke Walpert. Duke, thanks for joining me. I'd love for you to share with me kind of what is a structured settlement. Give us a little bit of context there.
Sure, Mike, my pleasure. Thanks for having me today on the program. A structured settlement essentially is a cost-effective alternative to a lump sum settlement, a cash settlement. It's a series of tax-free future periodic payments established between an insurer or self-insurer and an injured party, a claimant or plaintiff, as part of either a workers' compensation settlement or a personal injury settlement. They're designed to protect and offer security to injured parties so that they can meet their financial obligations in the future. Essentially, they bridge the gap to settlement. And anyway, parties can move closer to settlement by simply a change in the way the settlement is funded certainly is a step in the right direction.
Absolutely. I agree with that. And I think these points you made are very good ones. Alternative to cash, really that lump sum settlement, it's an alternative to that. This point, I think that tax-free periodic payments is really a strong benefit to this. And then not to really be understated is that protection and security issue that really those structures offer throughout that settlement process. So thanks for sharing those points, Duke. Now, tell me really how are these used then in the workers' compensation space really to really leverage these benefits that you mentioned?
Yeah, what we're seeing in the workers' compensation space is a growing use of structured settlements when it comes to the funding of Medicare set-aside allocations. In addition to the MSA, the Medicare set-aside allocation, oftentimes there are non-Medicare allowable expenses that aren't part of the Medicare set-aside allocation cost projection that need to be quantified. And many times we actually structure those non-Medicare allowable expenses as well as the MSAs that we see. On the indemnity side of the cases, we oftentimes are pulled into permanent and total claim scenarios, widow benefits, minors, in catastrophic claims, burns, amputations, traumatic brain injuries, for instance, or certainly cases that we're asked to get involved in to customize proposals that assist in meeting the financial needs of the injured parties in the future. On occasion, we see situations involving injured parties with drug dependency or competency issues, folks that for one reason or another cannot manage their own money. And there is certainly a value in the funding of those settlements with periodic payments and structured settlements. And finally, the use of the structured settlement is growing in conjunction with the growth of Medicaid entitlement and the Medicaid programs in the states. In order to protect entitlements for Medicaid recipients, oftentimes the funding of the settlement has a direct correlation with their eligibility status. So the funding of a settlement with the use of periodic payments, a structured settlement, certainly provides some protection to injured parties when it comes to ongoing and continuity of Medicaid entitlement.
And I think a couple of things that you said there, this competency issue, and we talked about that in regards to that drug dependency, but I think we hear these stories so often of the lottery winners who get this huge sum of money, and a couple of years later, the people that go bankrupt, and it's just a very common story. And I think the value here is in really that protection, which we talked about in those benefits initially, and these catastrophic indemnity cases, those things that Duke mentioned there, I think very valuable when you really put that in the context of leveraging this for those better outcomes for those injured workers. So let's talk about that now, Duke. How do we now leverage these tools? How do we leverage this tool then in the context of really creating those better outcomes, both for the injured worker and then creating those lower workers' compensation costs?
Absolutely. When we look at outcomes on the insurer and self-insurer side, the primary payer side, oftentimes the use of structured settlements offers a reduction and the paid lost hours in the claim, the lost hours associated with a claim file. It oftentimes leads to improved cycle times or closing ratios for claims professionals. And what we find is that it at times avoids unnecessary expenses, especially in cases in litigation, either litigation costs or ancillary expenses related to the litigation. So clearly there's value from a cost containment and cycle time claim inventory perspective when it comes to the use of structured settlements.
I agree. Now let's talk about those, those injured workers now. So we're saving money through the use of really these lost hours, the comparison of using an annuity versus a lump sum payment, and really leveraging that interest and that savings that can occur. Now let's talk about those injured workers now in that perspective and some of those benefits and creating a better outcome for them as well.
Yeah, understanding that the plans that we develop are individually customized. They're done that way to meet the needs of the injured parties, and every plan is a little different. In conjunction with the structuring and workup for the pricing of the Medicare set-aside, there are oftentimes the non-Medicare allowable expenses and other needs on the indemnity side that we need to address with the injured parties, as well as their own financial needs that will lead to the establishment of the creative design, the structured settlement proposal. And by doing that, it bridges the gap to the settlement. It gets the parties closer to resolving the claim at hand.
And I think that really summarizes it nicely in the sense of really customizing those needs. I think when we talk about objections that injured workers might have, that would be a fear of mine, certainly, if I was offered a settlement, that I want to make sure that my needs are protected. And as you said, I think one of the things you said there, which I think was key, is it's really individual. It's individual to that individual person. Do they need some money up front to pay for certain things? How much money do they need over time? And really customizing it to meet those needs. And as we said, at the same time, saving those workers' compensation costs for the payer organizations. So Duke, thanks for joining me. I'd love to just share some final thoughts as we wrap up here.
My final thought would be that we need to remember that an injured party who's been disabled for a period of time that receives a settlement may not be going back to work. This could be the last check, the last payment that they receive for the rest of their lifetime. So protecting their financial future is certainly something that we want to be part of, and structured settlements absolutely do just that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and I think that point of really thinking that it's the last check that that individual can receive is a very powerful point, and really leveraging this tool to create those better outcomes for that individual person, and as we mentioned, at the same time, lowering those workers' compensation costs for the payer organizations. So thanks again, Duke, for joining me today, and remember, your success in workers' compensation is defined by your integrity. So be great.